So for me, there's something about preparation that's more activating consciousness. You're starting to relate. You're starting to relate with yourself. You're starting to relate with the experience.
Welcome to the Set and Setting podcast with Madison Margolin. As a journalist, Madison has spent years exploring the intersection of psychedelics, cannabis, and culture. This podcast brings together thought leaders from today's psychedelic renaissance to talk about the role of psychedelics in our inner and outer lives. You can support this podcast and find additional resources at BeHereNowNetwork.com/Madison.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Set and Setting podcast. Our guest today is Ido Cohen. Dr. Ido Cohen, Psy.D, serves individuals, couples, and groups in San Francisco. He received his Psy.D from the California Institute of Integral Studies and trained at the Young Institute in San Francisco. He works with a diverse range of challenges, including childhood trauma, inner critic, relationship and intimacy challenges, lack of fulfillment, psychospiritual growth, as well as psychedelic integration and preparation sessions with individuals and groups. His doctoral study researched the integration processes of ayahuasca ceremonies while applying Jungian psychology to better understand how to support individuals in their process of change and transformation. He's currently finishing a study on the use of psychedelics in couples. He is the founder of the Integration Circle and facilitates workshops on different dimensions of integration and the intersection of mental health, spiritual health, and the entheogenic experience. So thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. It's always...
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I've known Ido for a while now, and he's always one of my favorite people to interview. So I'm excited about this.
I'm glad to be here, and I want to start by saying Mazel Tov and congratulations.
Thank you.
You're now touring for your book. Yeah, good deal.
Yeah. It feels weird, and I guess we can talk about why it feels weird, kind of releasing a book into a world that is so tumultuous. And one of the things that I guess, everyone's talking about psychedelics, right? And they're talking about the promise of psychedelic therapy, and people are joking about how we should just give psychedelics to all of Israel, Palestine and cure the whole problem. And, I always say, and I hope that it gets across also in my book, that psychedelics are not really about psychedelics. They're about what do you do with them afterward? Like, what do they open you up to? What kind of consciousness do they open you up to that actually is the work, or is the path, the psychedelic path, more so than even ingesting a substance. So I want to start with, I know you have a focus on integration as part of your practice. So what is psychedelic integration? How do you define it? What's the method behind it? Just kind of tell the audience, let's analyze integration.
Let's just get right into it. I think about integration as first of all, it's an ongoing process, and it has two layers. There is what I would call an introverted internal process, which is I have an experience, I take the experience, I go through the emotional, somatic, psychological, spiritual components, right? And I think the big thing here is to not notice where I have more attraction and where I have more repulsion. Right? Usually people, when they do integration, they kind of tend to gravitate towards things that maybe feel really good or are very, very intoxicating or curious, and shy away from things that feel negative or painful. So the idea is to get into to go through all those dimensions with as less judgment as possible and as much curiosity as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's just the beginning. So that's the introverted kind of part of the integration. And then there is the extroverted and the application of it. Right. So there is integration, and then there is what do I do with it? How does it get translated to a action? Now, we don't want to rush into that, right? We don't want to rush into, okay, let me do something, right? We had the people, I think it's Stan Groff, said, don't do anything within the first 72 hours after a psychedelic experience. I worked with a lot of people who come out either incredibly inspired or start feeling like they resolved something big and they want to do what I call like press the atomic reset button. Okay, let me quit my job and leave my partner and do it. It's like, wait. That might resolve momentary suffering, but it's not going to it's not going to really nurture you, and you won't get to experience the wisdom of what you went through. You're just getting rid of things. So let's not rush into that. So the extroverted part is really about implementation. After I go through that inner process, I gain the insight, I understand it, I feel it. Big component for me in integration is feeling the thing in your emotional body, in your physical body. And then that tells me what's the next step. And the next step as far as implementation can be anything from changing my diet to leaving my partner, to leaving that job, to having a hard conversation, to anything else, right? There is limitless to implementation. So in short, for me, that's integration. And I think the biggest thing is that it's ongoing. For me, good integration is it keeps opening doors. You can do integration with one experience for a long time, and the experience will keep opening up for you. If you know how to ask those questions, if you sit with it, if you give it time, if you start really kind of working the lessons into your life, other things are going to open.
Mm-hmm. And how do you, what does it look like in practice? Like if a person, has a significant trip or a journey or whatever experience of the substance, and they're like, okay, now what? Like what are the actual action items that someone could be taking? Whether again it could be journaling or what I've found helpful is taking something sensory from the psychedelic experience and using it as almost a souvenir in your regular life that is now been infused with the consciousness of the medicine. If I read a certain prayer book or do a certain yoga pose or hear a certain music or smell a certain scent, it's all going to sort of take me back there. So what are the physical, tangible things that someone can do to activate that kind of internal seeking and self-interrogation and, putting that into practice?
I think all you named is great, especially the scent thing, right? We know that smell is the one thing that goes through the barrier in our brain and really activates us, doesn't go through that filter. So anything I usually like to tell the people I work with is write your story. Don't just write it up, because what happens is that if we don't document it, the psyche is going to start organizing the experience how it needs to fit. So it's going to start taking away painful parts or minimizing certain things or starting to doubt and judge, because the psyche is built for homeostasis. So anything that's anti-homeostasis, it's going to start taking it.
Mm-hmm.
Froze. Okay, we're here. So you write your story, and the next thing is, if you have something like a physical posture, right? Maybe you're on your side in position. Go back to that experience. Create a space in your meditation, in your way. Go back and see, how did that feel? How does it feel when I do it now? Maybe there was an empowering posture. Maybe I sat really straight and I felt big and powerful and strong, which I don't usually. Great. Can I do a practice around that? So to really bring, like, I love what you said, all these souvenirs. That's such a great way to think about it. All these really tangible souvenirs, and to start weave them into my integration practice.
Mm-hmm.
And because what it does is it activates the body memory. Right? It activates the emotional memory, activates the body. I always tell people also to do integration walks. So to go for integration meditation. So you don't just sit and meditate. Bring all your experience, all the feelings, all the sensations, if you're able, and walk into that, to the forest, to your urban walk, into your meditation, into whatever, but bring it with you. So if you're working with a very deep feeling of grief, bring your grief. Or take it for a walk. but take it for a walk. Don't just go in a walk and like, oh, wow, the trees and this, which is great. We sometimes need to do that. But like bring the thing that's really alive. It's about continuing alive.
Well, I often find that also the integration starts with the preparation. And especially if you're someone who has a kind of ongoing relationship with psychedelics, and whether you're doing it once every few months or once a year or whatever the cadence is your integration becomes the preparation becomes the integration. And so, I found like if you already have a yoga practice in place, you're that's part of preparing for the experience, because once you're having the experience, you can turn to a particular pose that like is there for you, and then come back to it. Again, child's pose for me is one of the most obvious poses, but yeah, what does preparation, I guess, look like in light of this integration philosophy?
Right. So preparation tools are great things like I have a crystal that helps me orient or helps me ground, or a picture or an image or a pose or a breath work, right? Really important pieces, the breath.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the tools that will help me navigate. But the preparation on a deeper level, or more on that reflective level, is what's my intention? What am I bringing into this experience?
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's something you and I talked to that feels relevant, which is we can't disconnect the setting from the preparation, right? And let's think about where we are right now in time. If the world is on fire and all these things are happening politically, geopolitically, and they're impacting me, that should be part of my preparation, or it should be a consideration. Because if I've been sitting and I'm online and angry and grieving and hurt, and I'm in this, that's going to come with me, right? We talked about we have this fantasy that we can create this sterile container that's disconnected from the collective, from the energies of the world. So I think it's really expanding the idea of setting more than just the room I'm sitting in. It's like, what's happening in my community? What's happening in this country? What's happening in the collective, what Jung called the collective unconscious? Because I've worked with people who go in and then they're totally shocked and surprised when their experience is full of war images or dark energies, or they're feeling a conflict that's happening halfway across the world. So as far as I think all of that should go into, if you really want to do in-depth preparation, all of that should go into. I always tell this story about a woman I worked with who were fortunate enough to win ayahuasca retreats in some raffle. I'm very lucky for her, which freed up a lot of money for her to do really proper. And we met for 8 preparation sessions. And when she came out, she said, "You have no idea how helpful that was, because nothing that came my way surprised me. And even the things that came my way that were hard, we already talked about in some way. So the emotional impact didn't feel like I was hit by a car. It felt like, oh, here's this thing. I can sit with it. I already have a relationship."
Mm.
So for me, there's something about preparation that's more activating consciousness. You're starting to relate. You're starting to relate with yourself. You're starting to relate with the experience.
Yeah. I think that's huge. I think the more deep you get into yourself, like you said, someone once said to me, like, I was considering going to ceremony or whatever. And she said, like, you've been doing psychedelics like since you're 18 years old. She's like, what epiphanies are left for you? Like, what revelations do you think you're actually going to have? Like, what you need to do with your life, like eat well, do your yoga, like, and I guess I see it as like at this point with psychedelics, like as much as I miss the sort of like, like sparkle type of, fireworks experiences, it now feels a little bit more like a tuning fork or a fine tuning kind of, refining my intentions and how I'm relating to the time in the calendar, or the seasons, or like you mentioned, the spiritual energies at play. And so I want to talk about that. When you mentioned before we started the podcast, the concept of expanded set and setting, and how, the setting, we can't ignore the sort of geopolitical or spiritual setting that is, at play. And then how does that setting also then impact our set, right? Like, how can we intentionalize internally around the external factors that are, seeping into our consciousness and heart space?
Absolutely. I think you know this, but I was in Israel from October 4th till the 20th. So I was there 3 days before it all happened and through the first wave. And when I came back, a lot of the people that I work with knew that I was in Israel. And what I found interesting, and this is before, these are not people who were on psychedelics. We'll get to that. What it triggered for them is their own intergenerational experience of themes that are related to what's happening in Israel and Palestine. So for some of them, it was their own relationship with of violence, of aggression, of suffering as a child, of their country being invaded, or power dynamics between, right? Some of them are immigrants, between their country of origins too. So, right, how is it that these people where is this getting triggered from? I don't think they're just trying to empathize with me. I think it's something in their intergenerational memory, in their epigenetics is stirred up because of these spiritual energies, because of the collective energies. So I think if you're on top of on psychedelics, right, that's what they do. They open us. I mean, you and I talk about it, and I talk about it also with Lauren Taus about how psychedelics can really open up our ancestral memories. I mean, I've had psychedelic experiences where I was in the exodus out of Egypt and feeling displacement and feeling abuse and feeling homelessness and feeling all these intense narratives, right? You and I talk often about the idea of home. Where is home? What is home? What is home for the wandering Jew, or where all of that? Where are these things? Right. So psychedelics really open us up to that, to all our intergenerational links. Mm-hmm. And if I don't, and I think it's interesting, I actually have a question, but I'll come back to, right. The more you do psychedelics, I think you keep opening, you get to a place where you open yourself up to stuff that is how my personal is related to the transpersonal, to the ancestral. So I'm not just anymore working out my parental traumas. It's like it starts seeing things on the deep, right? All the layers that led to this moment. And how do we bring that back into the set, right? Into the set and setting of the moment, right? So now I'm walking in and I'm just, in a way, I can think about it. Well, I'm not just walking in with myself. I'm walking in with my ancestors. Mm-hmm. Walking in with my intergenerational connection. Not baggage. Connection. And we can talk about that. What makes it, when is it a baggage? When is it connection, right? But it starts being something a lot more, for me, it becomes a lot more holistic.
Yeah, I wonder why people have why it's such a psychedelic trope to connect with the ancestors. And, it makes me wonder, like, is there a science behind it? Or is there a science that is more spiritual in nature even the scientists haven't been able to articulate? And, my first guess is that, psychedelics are so beyond the realm of like time and space and time and materialism. And so, and again, for you as a practitioner, the word soul, right? Like, I feel like a lot of Western practitioners are not necessarily using that kind of language, but whether, like, I wonder, like, what is it about the psychedelic experience? Yes, for sure. Like, I know for a fact, like, it kind of can put our own souls into more stark relief, but how is it that we're now able to connect with the souls or the trans time, like, experience of other people we're related to or past life? What's that about, and like, where is it coming from, and how is that something to factor into our preparation for a psychedelic experience or understanding of what we might have experienced?
I actually love the word entheogenic more than psychedelic, because entheogenic is about soul, right? And we leave kind of the realm of the psyche, which feels a little bit more modern, and has less of the spirit in it. So I prefer entheogenic in that way. I think that, there is MAPS did a study in collaboration with Jota 4 and write about epigenetics, and Joe has a whole bunch of stuff in his book Fellowship of the River about how ayahuasca brings to life your epigenetics, right? It's that DNA code that's transferred among generations that carries memories in it. And lo and behold, here these plants he talks about it in such a beautiful, vivid way, how the plants enter into your epigenetics, and they activate it. They bring it into consciousness. What does that activation mean? It means it brings it into consciousness. So I think about it from the Jungian perspective, right? That psychedelics and entheogens move us from the personal, my personal shadow, my personal stuff, to the collective unconscious. How I'm connected to all. And not just how am I connected to all, to just the all. And the all can be my ancestry, the all can be your ancestry, the all can be collective archetypes that impact all of us, like death, birth, war, power, greed, sex, life, death, all those things. And because they allow us to move, I think a part of it is, and I'm curious what you think, is that psychedelics, part of what they heart is that they move us out of the survival reality that we are always in. Right? Most of us live in a survival reality, right? I need to go to work. I need to provide. I need to make sure that I have things to eat, me, mine, my closest. We are living in a time where we have privilege to meander and wander in spiritual, transpersonal spaces that were not accessible only 2 generations before us. I mean, you wrote a whole book about it. The 60s were the thing. They were so powerful because they gave access to masses of people to these transpersonal spiritual realms. Mm-hmm. The 60s were not that long ago. We want to think that it's that long ago, but they were not that long ago. And before that, it was relevant. It was relegated to who? To the Kabbalistics, to the mystics, to the underground of the Christian church, and the Sufis, and all these sects. They had access to it, not the masses. And now there's nothing you can't Google as far as mysticism, esoteric traditions. It's a few clicks away.
Well, you can Google it, but I feel like it's one thing to, I think it's one thing to know it. It's another thing to experience.
Absolutely.
So, and how do you sort of cultivate the conditions within yourself to be sensitive enough to recognize when you're experiencing another realm, such as, for example, in Kabbalah, we talk about there's 4 worlds of, four worlds, and that we're operating in the lowest level, or the most earthly level, I'll say. Mm-hmm. And it works its way up, and you get to the realm of ideas, and you get to ultimately the realm of unit of consciousness, the kind of the space of God. But how does one actually recognize? How does one recognize the experience, or can feel the experience of these other types of consciousness and realities?
Would you answer that first before I answer?
I mean, I answer it in terms of it just takes a lot of tuning in. I think you have to be in a constant conversation with yourself and with God and your body, and also paying attention to what's activating moments of transcendence, of sometimes I've spent a lot of time in Sfat, which is a Kabbalistic city in northern Israel, for those in the audience, and I just have moments where sometimes I just feel high, I'm completely sober, but I just all of a sudden will get just a whiff, and or I'll be really easy to like, something will bring me to tears in like not in a bad way, just in like, oh, okay, like I'm emotionally, it's almost emotional health, it's like my emotional body is really working properly. And, I being here, being in America, I can sometimes, like, if I really close my eyes and like tune into that, like I can try to like, and I've done this with my therapist too, where I like am tapping and kind of putting myself there. And like, there's all sorts of modalities to reactivate a consciousness that's associated with a certain time and space, time in space, but doesn't have to be tied to it necessarily. And I do think like that transcends the realm of what you would say is called a Sia in Kabbalah into other channels of consciousness. But I don't know if that's a relatable answer to anybody. Yeah.
I think it is. My first experience of what you described in Psy I actually had in India. I read Be Here Now in India for the whole trip. It was like, oh, and I remember very distinctively going into altered states, extremely sober, and being aware that I am in an altered state and being like, how is this happening? I'm just here sitting up. And then it took me a while to start putting things together. I'm like, oh, wait, I'm sitting on the Ganges River and they're burning a body and chanting. The amount of spiritual energy around me is mind blowing. How wouldn't I be in an altered state? And I'm sitting there fixated. I'm looking at them. So obviously I'm starting to participate. But I think you named it as far as, for me, it's about relationships and embodiment. I spent my spirituality, I don't know how you started, but my spirituality was very up here in the beginning. I wanted a sense, I enjoyed the ascending part of it. And why I did my first study, because I came back from India. I was there with a bunch of my friends, with my partner, who then was my partner for 7 years. And we came back and everybody fell apart. I was like, and people were crying and the same old symptoms, and there's no holiness anymore and anything. And I was like, wait, how's it possible? For a whole year, we were in relationship with that thing, with this a whole wider experience of the universe. And it takes 3 weeks for us to like forget all of it? That doesn't make sense to me. And that's where the seed was planted of integration. It was like, no, there's got to be some bridge. There has to be some bridge that we just didn't discover, or I didn't discover. And I'm going to find that bridge. I'm going to find it for all of us. And so, yeah, I think it's when I came back, it was I had to learn how to embody. How do I bring this into my full embodiment? And embodiment is not just about the body, right? It's about, I think what you're naming, it's this ongoing relationship. It's a lot of work, to be honest. It's a lot of work to like be an integrated person who wants to live multidimensionally. And it's not in a spiritual way. It's really about being with open heart. So you feel a lot and you sense a lot. And, right? I remember a piece you wrote for Double Blind. I think it was that you were in an earthquake and it triggered a whole bunch of things. That is being somatically embodied, right? You could have just shaken it off and be like, okay, it's just the earthquake, but you allowed something to kind of come through. It's like, actually, it's not just the earthquake. Mm-hmm. The memory that I have in my body.
Well, I want to actually touch on that, is both of us were just now in Israel, at the beginning of the war starting, and I was in Sfat. I think you said you were more in the south, if I'm not. Yeah. And what you're saying about coming back from India is something I experience almost every time I come back from Sfat. Like coming from Sfat and going into New York is like I always have a horrible integration time, and I'm saying to myself, like, how is this a true spiritual connection if the minute I land in New York, I just I just go into like this state. And I remember once, like the minute I got off the plane, I like immediately got like a UTI, like at the airport. Like my body
Oh,
was
wow.
so angry about being back. And it just, there have been so many like weird, like another time I came back the day after I broke my foot, like I slipped on the staircase and my foot was broken. And I kept
Oh,
getting
wow.
weird, like injuries, like upon landing. And maybe there's some sort of, maybe it's coincidence, or maybe it was like spiritual, I don't know, some weird karma. But this time around, especially, I left Israel in a, and I want to talk about it a little bit, is like war is such a weird thing. I mean, it's kind of psychedelic in and of itself, or maybe even entheogenic. And then what I noticed, and again, I didn't grow up in Israel, so I don't have as much experience with this as people who, like yourself, who have lived it in more of a consistent way. But like when there's like an imminent threat, and it's not just about Israelis. What I want to say is, I'm just like going to make a statement. It's for everybody whose life at some point has felt like it could be in danger potentially. Just
Exactly.
Stating that. But I remember like, there were like sirens going off. And I had to like be driving, and I was not sure if I should be on the road because there were sirens going off. And I was like, maybe I should just like wait a little bit. But like, I ended up like deciding to drive to the airport as to make the flight that I had already booked. And it puts you into like this presence, like fear. And I wasn't even scared. That's the thing, is it's like I could not afford to be scared. It reminds me of this Rabbi Nachman quote, like the world is a narrow bridge. Like the most important thing is to not be afraid. And like, it feels like in moments where like you really are kind of facing this kind of existential, you're just facing the existential, like it forces you into a kind of presence and also a total alignment. And like where you're like, no, okay, like your priorities just get like really clear and really straight. And like also like there is this presence of mind in alignment with like what your body has to be doing in that moment, just to like stay vigilant. And so it's not like, I feel even messed up like talking about like a silver lining of having to experience that sort of trauma and whatever. But like, and I remember a week later I was in New York. I did a cactus ceremony. I just felt like I needed to be in a place of prayer. And I like my whole body was like shaking. Like I was like crying and shaking and crying and shaking. And like I didn't realize like how much I was like actually holding on to while I was there, that I didn't have the ability to express because I needed to just keep myself in order. But what I'm saying is, and I guess this is like a super roundabout way, coming out of like this war situation, and also just like I said, I always have this experience of when I leave, my body just like I kind of fall apart. I said to my body, I said, you have to keep it together this time. Like I know, like really, like when I'm there, like my skin is better, like my digestion is better, like I just feel physically, and again, because I'm more spiritually aligned, and that has an effect on my whole, parasympathetic nervous system and the health of my physical body. And I just like, I almost like made a pact with it. I'm like, you really have to like hold it together, like keep the skin good, like try to like maintain the like healthy digestion. Like I don't, I'm not doing anything differently, but it's really just trying to like hold the consciousness that I have here. Like it shouldn't be place dependent, at least as far as I think. So I'm saying a lot of things, and I guess I wanted to sort of ask you, like, how does that land? Like, how can we like maintain that spiritual essence, or how can we also, and embody it without having to be on the Ganges River or, in some cave and spot. And then taking that and also coming from, a war zone into a ostensibly safer place. Like, how does that also translate? So maybe it's two questions at once.
You bring I have three things that I think. I do think that for me, there's a difference between connection to place and connection to energy. I think for me, there's certain energies that live in the earth that can't be duplicated. Right? Israel has so much history and energy in the soil. Same places everywhere. The United States, every place has an energy. And I think there is a metaphor there for psychedelic experiences, because I think that's part of we every time I do psychedelics, I had to learn to teach myself to grieve the ending. Because I feel like, oh, I'm leaving. I'm in this place. I'm in this like land. And I'm leaving. And I can't. There's aspects of it I cannot take with me. And I see a lot of people we do that Western thing where we wanna own. It's like, no, I can take all of it. It's like, no, you can't. It's impossible. So there is a way in which, like, yeah, I go to Israel, I get charged in a different way because it's my ancestry. I was born there. It's right. And it's a way I come here different. I feel clear and I feel direct, and all my Israeliness comes out and all this. And I come here and it's like there for 2 weeks, just like a second. And then it starts kind of falling apart and my American self starts kicking in because I have to be here. And I had to learn to like grieve it and integrate it. Right. There shouldn't be any reason why I can't read the Tehillim in the morning, only there, not here. There shouldn't be any reason that I can't be direct there. Right. There is, but there's things about land. So I think there is something here that you're bringing, which is there is grief because there's energies we can't take with us. And trying to like hang on to it is actually something we want to be aware of, because it's indicator of something. What am I trying to bring with me? What am I so like passionately wanting that I'm lacking when I'm in my day-to-day life? And that is a big thing in psychedelic integration. What is the thing I'm clinging to so much that I'm shutting away everything else? You know, I'm one of my biggest. I have a thing with Burning Man culture. Burning Man culture is great, but this idea that that's home and everything else is default, I feel it's such a psychic trap, because it means that 358 days of the year, you're living in a horrible place, trying to recreate home, as opposed to what you're saying. It's like, no. Home is something that lives internally. And you're constantly trying to relate and become it and live through it and express it.
No, that was actually exactly. Oh, go on. Sorry.
No.
It was what I wanted to ask you next, which is, I feel like home is so much, is so central to the psychedelic experience. I also, if I could rename my book, which I would have liked to do, maybe, it would have had home in the title. And it feels like, also obviously for also being a Jewish person, being a Jew, say, home is like a central, something we reckon with on a regular basis. But, Ram Dass said, we're all just walking each other home. And I think he probably meant that in terms of like the cycle of life and like, where are we going at the end of it? But for me, I feel like, there are all these metaphors when we talk about psychedelic or entheogenic experience, which is tripping, journeying, right? Like you're going somewhere and you return and, you're coming home to what? Like you're coming home to yourself, your ego, your body, your, what is that? And so I wanted to understand like how we can really explore and define home, and how does that allow us to integrate psychedelic experiences or that are with or without substance, right? Like you could have you could take mushrooms, or you could go to India or whatever, any sort of altered experience where we maybe feel at home with our souls in a way that we don't on a mundane level. But yeah, how can we keep that alive for us and always be home, or channel home at least?
I think for me, it's what I've experienced and learned. It's you are always home, and you're always going and bringing back pieces of home. So you're constantly in it, and you're constantly building it at the same time. right? So we can talk about it as a process of being and remembering. So you're always being and remembering at the same time, right? This is where I think linear thinking is kind of out the door. We have to think in paradoxes. It's the both and. So how is it that I'm always in it, but also kind of, right? So we go have a psychedelic experience and you're bringing pieces back, right? A lot of people go into a psychedelic entheogenic experience and they're like, oh, I remembered so and so. And it can be anything from, oh, I remembered that as a child, I used to love painting. I should pick up painting again. To, oh, I remember how I am part of God and we are all this and the land is. How are you remembering this? Which, right, it indicates that on some level you already knew it. But it's so deep, right? We have to go and sift through the layers of what it means to be human to reconnect with that. I wonder what you think. I took a course with a Kabbalistic rabbi that I take courses from about authenticity. And I will not be able to summarize this course, obviously, but he said authenticity is 50% being totally immersed in the moment. And 50% is entering into an unknown creative space where God resides. So if God is not part of your lingo, it means you're entering 50% of discovery. So 50% you're always here immersed in the present, and 50% you're constantly discovering. So I think for me, that's how you build home. You're always here. You're right here. So I'm right here with Madison having a conversation. How is this conversation landing at me? Why does this moment feel so good and juicy and yummy and warm? And then you say something and I feel horrible and I'm angry at you. Like, what is that about? Right? And that's the discovery piece. I start asking questions. And that helps me build my home. Because maybe then we sit on a roof in Sfat and all of a sudden we are having a spiritual experience together through conversation or through listening to someone play a song. But if I'm not present, I'm not going to be aware of that.
Well, I feel like home is. Go on.
No.
Home is a little bit of a relationship, right? And I think
Absolutely.
If you have an experience, if I'm with someone in Sfat and I get to hang out with them in New York, it's like, okay, like it's a piece of that. And it's like, it's in the, I don't want to say like it's in the love, right? But like, or there's that song, right? Like home is wherever I'm with you, right? But I do wonder like whether, and I think that's true, right? Like in a really solid partnership, you do feel that, or you feel that in certain friendships or whatever it is, right? Like when people go to Burning Man or Rainbow Gathering, it's not because they're on the playa. I mean, it is maybe, but also because they're with their community who they can be their most authentic selves with. And, my question is like taking that without it having to be dependent on someone else, then it kind of begs us to really interrogate what is our relationship with ourselves or our relationship with Creator, because that's like the relationship of home that is the foundational to whatever else, I guess.
Absolutely. I think that's the word for me. It's what you're saying. It's relationship. I think relationship is the thing that helps you build a home, right? You can be, I've was a helper and did research and I've spent time with a lot of ayahuasca communities. And it's interesting how a bunch of strangers can come in being utter strangers to each other. And at the end of a weekend or a week or 2 weeks, they're like, oh my God, you guys feel like family, or you feel like my community. And why is that? Because they were present, few reasons, right? We share this psycho-spiritual space together. I get to see you cry and pee on yourself and go through all these things that you would never go through a lot of people. But you also hear people, right? You're open, you're sharing, you're listening. You're actually invested in connection. You're present into connection. And that space, that mutual presence creates, I think, triggers in us something that we call home. It triggers in us a sense of belonging. When COVID was happening, I did a lot of courses and workshops with Deanna Rogers. And the interesting thing for us was that maybe there was two consistent feedback points we got. And the first one was people said, I don't feel alone anymore. Just coming and being with a group of people who are talking about their integration, their preparation, their pain, their shame, made them not feel alone. It opened them up into connection. And we had from courses of us, communities sprouted. We would hear about it 6 months later, like, oh my God, yeah, we met together in New York, or we talk to each other all the time, or they formed their own integration circle, right? But there is a certain type of actually, I want to make it into a question, right? It requires a certain type of vulnerability or certain type of openness,
Right. I think it's
in order to open myself up to create a home, right?
right. You have to, and I think that's also why it's not in every single relationship, right? Like you really have to, like when you're home in a partnership, or you're going to make a home with someone or whatever it is, like there needs to be that element of like getting to your realest, rawest self, where you're like, it's a soul connection rather than an ego connection. And so I think maybe that's why when people are in ceremony together, or in times of, in tough times together, it actually is like positive for relationships sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Right. That's part why MDMA is great for couples.
Right.
Right. You can live with someone, and one day you love them, and the next day you hate them, and then for a week you hate them, and you don't want to see them, and then they come into the space, and all of a sudden something melts away, and that part of us that wants to be seen, recognized, feel that connection starts to come online. And lo and behold, I'm not that what felt yesterday like the thing that if you don't understand about me, or right, I'm never gonna forgive you. All of a sudden that falls away. And we are talking about hard things. We are engaging, we are crying, and then the spiritual elements can come up. All of a sudden we're like, oh my God, like, remember when we thinking about in the couple study that we did, a lot of couples walked in to work with their issues, and they came out always with something more. They came out with looking at each other and seeing the other's humanity, but also the other's divinity. And it's not, again, these are not necessarily spiritual people. Some of them were not spiritual at all. And they're like, I saw something in him that's more than I can explain. And I realized how beautiful this person is. And all my resentment fell away. And I realized we have a lot of work to do. And I was able to see the goodness in them, the specialty, how much I love them. Mm-hmm. Right? So without that openness, without that risk, I think there's a lot of risk taking, right, to create a home. If you want to create what you're talking about, a truly holistic home that invites all of our parts, there's a lot of risk to create that safety.
Yeah, I think that's a huge, that's huge. It's just acknowledging the risk, but, is it a choice, right? Like, if we don't take the risk, I guess we just remain in some sort of exile from home, or, a level of
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. To go to the title of your book. Yeah, exile.
Yeah. So,
but, I think we should also just acknowledge that a lot of us can't take risk, or we can take risk at a certain point, because it also depends on the level of relationship trauma that we have. And right, I just wrote a post 2 days ago about how our attachment system gets formed by other people's unresolved shadow. Mm. But it's maintained by us denying our shadow. Right? So I get my attachment system is formed by my parents. A lot of their unresolved stuff gets transferred to me, right? So here's the intergenerational piece.
Right.
And then we do all this psychedelic work to bring that to light. And then I have to start untangling. It's like, oh, I do this with Madison because my mom used to do this with me. And right.
The transfer.
So unless I do that, again,
it's like some sort of transference of the relationship.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. That intergenerational link. So I'm just another chain. Mm-hmm. But the moment we do this, I start breaking the chain or I'm altering the chain. So now it can be different with you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's so much the promise of, I'll say entheogenic work, but I don't necessarily mean that it has to hinge on an entheogen, but just the promise of the kind of consciousness and modalities of like self, and I feel like in Hebrew the word would be hitbonenut, like kind of like self-interrogation. That like psychedelics, I always say to myself, the reality is that not everyone is going to have psychedelic therapy. Not everyone wants it, or they're not going to just have access to it, or whatever it is. But what can we learn from what they show us and apply those values to the way that we're therapizing ourselves or engaging with society or engaging with certain systems or politics or Israel-Palestine conflict, and I think that's really the question is like, how can we create a climate of psychedelic or entheogenic consciousness that doesn't necessarily require people to dip into having substance for whatever reason, but that they can still benefit from the consciousness and realms that it necessarily or could potentially open people up to. Like living in a climate of integration. What was that?
What do you think? I have an answer, but I'm curious what you think. Really actually curious about.
No, I think that's why integration is the medicine. Like I don't think everyone I think if you're growing up or if you're living in a world that is the application of that is psychedelic ethos put into practice, that is the integration. I mean, that's why I love the Rainbow Gathering. It's like people who have been inspired by psychedelics and then create a society. It is the integration, but it's tangible. And then once you're there, you don't have to take a psychedelic. You're there, and it is psychedelic. So that's my personal philosophy or prayer for what we can actualize. But I'm curious what I think this is a good kind of like concluding question.
Yeah. I think it has to do with village model of learning, right? It's you can go and have a psychedelic experience, and if we as a village sit together and then you tell us your story, and I'm truly listening, it's not like, oh, look, Madison had this great experience. I'm like, wait, when she was talking about this, I was really moved. Or when she was talking about that, I had this whole response. When we facilitate groups, I always tell people, when you listen to someone talking, it's a half a meditation. The prompt is what activates you, what resonates with you, and what soothes you as I'm listening to someone else talking. Because there's so much information in that, right? It's that deep sense of presence, that deep sense of opening. I can learn so much from you. I love hearing people's psychedelic experiences because I feel like, in a way, I'm taking notes. I'm like, oh my God, that's incredible. That's brilliant. Like, I need to think about that. But I think it brings me back to what you said, which is bonenut, right? It's that taking on a practice of reflection. And I think a lot of us confuse thinking with reflection. We think like, oh, reflection is this thing where you think about, no, that's not reflection. That's actually ruminating. Reflection is really being in an open space of like, wow, when Madison said this, I was really moved. Why was I moved? And I noticed what's happening. Right? I'm looking inwards and seeing what's coming up. That's reflection, and doing this over and over. It's not that neurotic thing that we call thinking,
right?
Which is kind of grinding our heads, trying to figure something out. No, it's about learning. So I think that's the first thing. And the other is something that I think it's so palpable in the collective right now, is our capacity to hold differing opinions. If I am learning something from you and it really challenges my concept of self, Can I tolerate that and not automatically reject that? I think what we're really experiencing now collectively is a violent reaction against anything that's not what I believe in.
Yeah.
Which makes us all go into, right, very fast, we're splitting. It's splitting. We're splitting into groups. And you're either in my group or you're not. And there's no opportunity for me to learn anything from anyone unless they're from my group. So I'm basically not learning. I'm just, right, we call it echo chambers, right? I'm just like listening to myself talking just through someone else's body. So I think sitting in a village context of learning and having the capacity to hold opposites, to contain multitudes, which is so psychedelic, right? When you're in a psychedelic experience, how many times you go from sad, angry, happy, ecstatic, oh my God, Buddha, my mother, right? You kind of like filter through so much fast information and we're able to do it. Not 100%. We don't come back with all that. Mm-hmm. So I think that idea of really a village model of learning, I take you in, and then the capacity to hold opposites. Those are like key to having the benefit of learning from psychedelics without taking them.
That, yeah, I mean, that's something that I've been saying is I was interviewing a bunch of people about psychedelic, coexistence ceremonies and people doing their own psychedelic work, between Israelis and Palestinians. I was even talking to people living in the West Bank, psychedelic settlers, I've been calling them. And, obviously the Tel Aviv people, everyone. And one person said to me, like, psychedelic thinking or psychedelic consciousness at its foundational level is expanded consciousness. And can you hold two truths at once or multiple truths at once, that I feel at home in this land and you feel at home in this land, and just like allow that to be, and then go from there. That actually came from a quote unquote settler. But I thought, I thought it was like a really profound, and
absolutely. I know we need to finish, but
yeah,
Jung had this idea of tension of opposites. He said if you can't hold two things, that the only thing that births new consciousness is two things that are in opposition, slowly melting themselves into each other. That's the alchemy,
which is unity.
And when you do exactly, but the new has to, right? When you go to psychedelics, there is an old that's meeting new information. If the new and the old can alchemize themselves to get to a sense of unity, new consciousness is not birthing itself.
Yeah.
So you're basically just regurgitating things.
Exactly. So, I mean, I guess that's my prayer, just that we should always be able to evolve our consciousness into new consciousness, right? Yeah.
And then we do it together.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. How can people find you, follow your work?
Thank you for having me. This was great. We can talk 4 hours more. Yeah, they can follow us on Instagram, the Integration Circle, and if they want to follow me, it's Dr. Ido Cohen, also on Instagram, and that's the best place for now.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, Shabbos.